The ninth qualifying session of the 2025 Formula One season is far from ideal for Ferrari, which, although it improved the handling compared to yesterday, was unable to optimize the car's performance over a single lap. Basically, the same thing that happens every Saturday. Analyzing Friday's data, it seemed they might have entered the fight behind McLaren. However, Mercedes and Red Bull made a better step forward compared to free practice at the Circuit de Catalunya-Barcelona. There was quite a bit of anticipation surrounding the TD018 technical directive ahead of the Spanish Grand Prix. The Maranello team was convinced that, in some way, the FIA measure could penalize McLaren and, as a result, offer a significant advantage to the Red team. Reflecting on Saturday's result, we can confirm that the historic team completely misjudged its optimistic forecast. On the contrary, as we had predicted some time ago, the Ferrari SF25 might actually suffer more than the other top teams from this change concerning Aero elasticity. After all, expecting that less flexing would solve the Italian car's problems was rather far-fetched, even though Vasseur had repeatedly claimed otherwise. Let's wait for today's race to see what happens over the 300-kilometer race distance. The pace of the SF25 cars could be very good. It's not the first time that their performance improves on Sunday, delivering results very close to the best. This is the hope Ferrari is clinging to, even though it's clear that much more is needed to fight at the top. The next package of updates, expected in the coming weeks, might be the last hope to see a car at least worthy of its name. We are talking about the usual 2/10 that are missing, and weigh on performance when trying to stay behind the reigning world champion team. The handling of the Ferrari has partly managed to mitigate the lack of rotation seen during practice. The Italian team improved quite a bit in Turn 5, where you don't approach the curb but have to take the correct line. At least the setup was decent and not problematic, even though the now well-known shortcomings remain. Charles Leclerc continued to complain about the front end during qualifying. In the first chicane, he couldn't follow the same lines as the McLaren, being unable to use the same portion of the inner curb. Moreover, there was a noticeable lack of downforce, an issue we've been talking about for several weeks now. The SF25 suffers from this rather serious flaw. At medium and high speeds, the car is unable to generate the same level of grip as McLaren or Red Bull. In Turn 4, the difference in cornering speed is significant, and in general, in that section, the McLaren MCL39 single-seater has a lot of lateral grip. Looking at the split times, the SF25 car tends to improve as the lap progresses. This is a sign that the tire warm-up strategy and activation are delayed. There is a tendency to start the lap with tires generally below the target temperature. Yesterday, they lost a lot of time in the first sector, particularly between turns 2 and 3. We are especially referring to the part of the track exiting the first tricky chicane. In this case, the deficit is paid entirely in cornering. For this reason as well, we can confirm that the time loss is linked to suboptimal tire temperature. Afterwards, as the lap progresses, the tires heat up and start to work. Grip increases as the two compound temperatures, internal and external, approach the ideal value. In Sector 2, Lewis Hamilton lost about a tenth, while in the final sector the gap dropped below a tenth. Ferrari was fairly consistent in Sector 3, but by failing to maximize tire performance, the intended result slipped away. In qualifying for the Spanish Grand Prix, the Ferrari drivers therefore secured 5th and 7th positions. The setup improved progressively over the course of the Barcelona weekend, minimizing the significant lack of rotation. However, Charles Leclerc's conservative choice prevented him from fully taking advantage of the track evolution. The arrival of clouds lowered the track temperature by about 4 degrees, a modest but crucial drop in terms of tire thermal management. Data analysis shows that the most critical corners for the Monegasque in Q3 were the medium-speed ones. In particular, Charles Leclerc struggled in Turn 1 and Turn 4, where he suffered from limited rotation compared to Lewis Hamilton. His difficulties may be linked to suboptimal tire preparation, which forced him into a more cautious approach under braking, bringing less speed into the center of the corner. For the 7-time F1 world champion, the most problematic points during the Catalan qualifying session were Turn 5 and Turn 10, marked oversteer in Turn 10 and entry issues in Turn 5. In that section of the track, the Briton varied his braking point across different attempts, only finding a good balance on his final timed lap. McLaren once again proved superior in generating aerodynamic downforce. the TD018 directive had no impact whatsoever on the performance of the reigning world champions. Oscar Piastri made the difference with a cleaner driving style, especially in the first sector. Although his final time was similar to Lando Norris's, the latter's mistakes compromised the thermal stability of the tires, causing them to overheat. Looking at an entire section of corners, the red car showed improvement in the most technical parts. In Turn 5 and in the portion of the track between turns 10 and 12, Charles Leclerc ranked among the best. Compared to the early races of the season, the Monegasque is now giving more importance to corner exit. This advantage is due to the good mechanical grip at the rear, supported by effective camber recovery provided by the suspension. Additionally, this combines with the use of trail throttle, a technique useful in aiding rotation in slow corners. Max Verstappen performed excellently, although the Dutchman nearly lost third place to George Russell due to understeer that limited the RB21's competitiveness. Onboard footage shows how Max Verstappen was forced to increase the steering angle to compensate for the lack of rotation. Red Bull engineers shifted both the mechanical and aerodynamic balances to the rear, aiming to improve thermal management during the race. However, this choice penalized qualifying by making it harder to bring the front tires up to temperature. George Russell stood out for his clean driving, but lacked sharpness in corners. As shown in the data, the Briton didn't carry speed through the middle of the turns and struggled with traction. Both George Russell and Kimi Antonelli stood out on the straights, making full use of their car's low drag, especially on the main straight. McLaren also confirmed its high efficiency and remains by far the most complete car. Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc adopted a slightly different hybrid deployment strategy. As often happens, the two Ferrari drivers save energy in the early part of the main straight to favor traction on corner exit. Moreover, the SF25 has greater aerodynamic resistance, which limits top speed at the end of the straight. The race looks set to be tricky for both cars, partly due to their starting positions. Even though both drivers have two new sets of medium tires, dirty air and tire degradation could pose significant challenges. Team principal Frédéric Vasseur does not share this view and remains upbeat. Same for Lewis Hamilton, who is particularly optimistic for today's race at the Circuit de Catalunya in Barcelona. It will be crucial to verify whether the Maranello team has found the right race pace balance. The long-run simulation in the final free practice session for the Spanish Grand Prix was positive but not very telling, due to the low number of laps. It is possible that the drivers might start on the soft tire in order to be able to exploit extra grip in the early phase. Afterwards, it will become clear whether the car's updates will allow for better management of the medium compound.